set out some paints to use for this painting, and these are water mixable oils. I have titanium white, some Prussian blue, and some raw sienna. You could use Van Dyke brown as well, just as good. And surprisingly enough, the blue and the brown colours together make a lovely grey tone. I've got a 1-inch synthetic brush, and I've got a second one of those, a palette knife, and there's a couple of fan brushes there. Quite useful to have 2 of each of the brushes so that you don't have to keep stopping and washing. And lastly, I've got some water mixable linseed oil, and that's what we're going to be using to dilute our paints. So here I've set out my palette, and I have 2 separate blobs of the titanium white, and you'll see in a moment I'm going to thin one of them down. So here we are. I've already taken a dab of that paint to test it on my canvas and found it was too dry to use. We'll be using a wet base colour of white, and then we'll be painting over it with more colour. So that little sample I did first of all was far too dry, so I'm adding just 3 or 4 drops of the refined water mixable linseed oil to the titanium white, and I'm going to mix it thoroughly. And you can see from my technique here, what I'm doing is I'm mixing it all, and I'm going to gather it all up. You see me spread it across, and I'm just going to pick it all up in one big lump. And here I'm just checking to see the consistency. It should feel a little bit like whipped cream, so lovely and soft. You should be able to sort of dab your knife into it and make some little peaks into it, like you were doing a meringue icing or something like that. So yes, that's what you're looking for. Nothing too oily, nothing too dry. Okay, so here we go. We're ready to put some of this on our canvas, and I'm using just one of my 1-inch brushes here. I'm going to pick up a generous amount, and here you see I'm just going to spread this across my canvas. Lots of nice crisscross strokes, and it's important that we lay down a thin, even coat. I can't emphasize that enough. If we don't get enough on there, we'll be in trouble. Our painting will be very sticky, and it'll be hard to blend anything. And we can be too heavy with it. We can put on too much, in which case the painting will become really, really sort of wet and sticky. So here I am making sure I've got everything nice and even. I'm doing long side-to-side strokes, nice and even, and make sure you get those edges and corners. Make sure you've got everything covered as perfectly as you can. And before we start painting on it, we're going to test it. Now, see what I'm using here? Just doing one corner, but I'm using a different finger in that little section, my thumb in the middle, and here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for nice, clean, clear fingerprints. If I can barely see any paint on my finger, then it means I've not got enough. So this little pinky, this little finger's got more oil than paint, so that's not much good. But I want to see a clear fingerprint. Now I'm going to mix up my grey colour. I'm taking about 1/4 to 1/3 of the Prussian blue, and about 3/4 or 2/3 of the raw umber. You can substitute Van Dyke brown, and mix these thoroughly. You can see me again. I mix everything thoroughly. I collect it all up off the palette, and I flip it and I press it down and keep turning it over. The advantage of using a white palette is that you can see the colour you're mixing. Every time you lift it up, you can see a sample. So time to get some colour on that canvas. I'm going to use that same brush again that I used for applying the oily white paint, and I'm going to just dry clean it a little bit. I don't want to put any more of that paint on there, but I want to use the brush again. So here we go, into my nice grey colour. Now, it's a funny sort of grey. I'll give you that. It's sort of a greenish grey colour. Especially when you first start using it, it looks really quite odd. You'll see there's a greenish hint to it. It tends to go away once it's actually been drying for a little while. So this is a bit of a chameleon colour. It sort of goes on looking one way, and it actually finishes up looking like something slightly different. So it's a fun painting. Now, you see I started there in the corners. I put my first brush strokes in the top corners, because if it's a bit too strong, if I've got too much paint on my brush, I'd rather have dark corners than a big dark centre to my painting. So, and here you see I'm just going to be using little crisscross strokes here, very, very loose and brushy. I'm not at all trying to blend this, I'm just literally laying down a base of colour here, about halfway down my canvas. And you can see what's happening here, that it's darkest at the top, and as I'm working my way down you can see my colours starting to fade. So I'm getting a very nice sort of change of colour as I come down to the midline of my canvas here. So give it a nice brushing out. I'm going to just give my brush a little bit of a dry clean. There we go, give it a quick twirl, knock off all that surplus paint. Then I can go back up to that top corner, because you can see my corners are still pretty dark, and there's lots of brush marks all across this. So here we go, back into my corners, give it a nice little rebrush. Now the idea here is that I don't actually want to change all of it to one colour. I actually quite like that patchy look in here. You see I've got some lovely dark edges here, and that'll be very useful when we put some clouds on. We'll have a nice contrast of colours. So if I scratch where I might be putting a cloud, you can see I'm aiming for that edge of colour there, that lovely dark colour above. Yeah, that's it, that looks good. So that's an idea where I might put a cloud. So that's what I'm going to keep some of these areas. And it doesn't matter, you can plan your painting, you can sketch with the end of a brush handle and then just brush it over again and it all disappears. The soft white paint that we put on there to start with helps this paint blend and move. So it means you've got an almost infinite number of times to repair your work, and you can use it a bit like a magic rubber that's already there on the painting. So it's your instant repair, your instant fix. And here I'm just finishing this off. And do take some time with this, don't rush it. You want to brush these brush marks out. You want to try and remove as many of the brush marks as you can and get it nice and smooth. I probably could have spent a few more minutes doing this, but well, there you go. You live and learn, and I should have lived and learnt by now, but there we are. It just goes to show you can do painting for as many years as I have and still rush some stages. But maybe if I want to put a cloud here, I haven't got enough contrast behind it, and a white cloud on a pale background isn't going to work. So I'm deliberately going in with some of that dark colour, and I'm going to put back in some of the shadows that I'm losing here. So let me just come back in and block this back in again. I'm being very, very loose and sketchy with it. I'm not being too careful at all. And finally, I'm just going to gently brush out some of those darker edges here, but try and keep some of that dark showing. Be very gentle with this, just work gently across it. I did a bit of freehand on that left hand side, I didn't sketch, so I'm sort of going to take a bit of a gamble where my clouds are going to live. Got to live dangerously sometimes when you're painting. Don't be trying to plan it too much. It's sometimes fun just to let a painting develop on its own. And yeah, I'm just going to finish this off now with some long flat strokes to try and knock out any remaining brush marks I've got on there. So keep on dry cleaning that brush. You're going to be picking up paint, and you want to just gently move the paint around. So I'm just trying to get rid of those bigger brush marks, and have a pay special attention to those corners. You don't want to stand back from your picture, which is something you must do every 5 or 10 minutes. Take a stand back and look at those corners and make sure you haven't done sort of too dark triangles in the corners. And it can be really noticeable sometimes when you stand back and you notice that you've got a real sort of serious corner triangle, look like 2 ears of a panda. Now here I've been doing some more brush work, I've been blending out my painting, and I'm going to back over it one more time with a very gentle touch. Barely touch the canvas here, literally the weight of the brush is all you need, and we're ready for a cloud.